You will understand, all of you, what a very special experience this is for me, to come to the crusade 20 years, almost to the month, after this fellow, ex-Marine captain, White House tough guy, in the darkest days of Watergate, found myself in a friend's driveway one night, crying so hard I couldn't drive the automobile out of the driveway. I was witnessed to that night by a man who told me about Jesus. And that night I surrendered my life 20 years ago this summer to Jesus Christ. But what makes tonight so significant today in this stadium is that that man, Tom Phillips, had been a short while earlier led to Christ by Billy Graham at a crusade just like this. So I'm grateful to God for what he's done in my life and grateful to Billy Graham. Just last year here in America, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Watergate. I mean, where else but in America would you celebrate the anniversary of a burglary? During all of the interviews on the press, and I was interviewed by most of the national media, one of the most interesting was Mike Wallace, who's become a good friend of mine, and Mike did a 2-hour special on Watergate. Maybe you saw it. At the end of the special, he looked at me and he said, "What's your reaction now to Watergate 20 years later?" And I said to Mike Wallace, "I thank God for Watergate. I thank God that I went to prison." He looked at me with a startled expression, and I'm sure many viewers watching that on television had the same startled expression, but indeed it's true. I thank God for Watergate, and I thank God for prison, because through that experience I came to know what it is to have a day in and day out relationship with the living God, Jesus Christ. And I've discovered over these last 20 years, as I reflect back on them, the 3 most important things in my life have come from that: freedom, meaning, and hope. I have to tell you, good people standing here, and the older I get, the more important this becomes to me, that I could not live with what I know is in my heart, not the things I was accused of in the Watergate, that's nothing. I could not live with the sin that is deep in my own heart if I did not know for a certainty, for a fact, that Jesus Christ, an historical fact, that Jesus Christ died on the cross, taking upon himself my sins so that I could be free. Prison was nothing compared to the bondage of sin, and I can tell you that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't have the freedom of knowing that Christ had taken my sins away. Second is meaning. I travel around the world. I recently met some Russians. They ran up and they threw their arms around me and they kissed me on both cheeks and told me that my book, Loving God, had led them to Christ, that their lives were transformed. I received a letter from a Russian prison where 3,000 inmates had read one of my books, and many of them had given their lives to Christ as a result and found freedom in that prison. I recently received a letter from the president of Zambia that was addressed, "Dear Brother Chuck." And when I inquired as to what our relationship was, it turned out he'd been a prisoner in Zambia. He was converted to Christ. He was discipled by prison fellowship volunteers, and now he's out, the first freely elected president of that country. And I look back on my life, 20 years in politics and in government, sitting in the office next to the President of the United States, and I realized I never affected people's lives like that. Think how God has used my life out of my brokenness to touch the lives of others in ways that never would have been possible had I not surrendered my life to Christ 20 years ago. And the lesson of it is so important to all of us. Through those difficult times of Watergate, I could think back on my own life, all the wonderful, great accomplishments I had in my life, and academic honors and powerful positions in government, in the United States Senate, youngest administrative assistant in the United States Senate. What is it that God has chosen to use of my life to touch the lives of other people all around the world? My one defeat, the fact that I went to prison. I can remember being in prison and hanging on the bars and saying, "God, get us out of here. You know we're wasting our time in this place." And that's what God's chosen to use. The thing we can't credit or take credit in ourselves, the things we can't boast about, that's what God will use. If that's true, friends, let me tell you, what really matters in life is not so much what we do. Of course, do your best. Do everything with excellence to the glory of God. But remember always that what is much more important than what you do is what a sovereign God chooses to do through you. And therefore, your right relationship with God, your right relationship with Jesus Christ, and your obedience to Him is the most important single thing in the world, and God will use it in ways you can never imagine when you truly surrender to Him. The third lesson, and the reason that I'm so glad for Watergate and all that I went through, is hope. I listen to lots of my friends now, many of whom are still in government. I feel their sense of despair. I meet millions of Americans, thousands of Americans who tell me that they feel demoralized by the decay around us. Where is the hope? Well, let me tell you, having spent 20 years in government at the highest offices in our land and 20 years now as a Christian, the hope that each of us has is not in who governs us or what laws are passed or what great things we do as a nation. Our hope is in the power of God working through the hearts of people. And that's where our hope is in this country. That's where our hope is in life. I look back on these last 20 years and I realize that 7 months of them as a Christian was spent in prison. A good part of them, several months spent in a hospital when I almost died from cancer surgery. I've had some tough experiences. The Christian life isn't an easy life. But I wouldn't trade the worst day of the last 20 years for the best day of the 40 years that preceded it, because I know Jesus Christ is true. And today, my prayer for all of you who have come here is that you will find freedom, not just from prison as I did, but freedom from guilt and sin. That you will find meaning in your life, and that meaning in your life only comes when God begins to use you, and He can only use you when you surrender yourself. And that you'll find the hope of glory not in the vain things of this world or not in the powers of this world, but in the one who was raised from the dead and who lives today, the hope of glory, Jesus Christ. God bless you.